Hello also to everyone on the live stream. I think it's on now, so hello if you can see us. This guest doesn't really need an introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. So please help me welcome Paralympian, author, TV presenter, travel journalist, documentary maker. Is that everything?
Yeah, that's more than everything. More than everything.
Ade Adepitan.
Thank you, thank you.
I'm going to start off with a quote from you, actually,
Uh-oh.
which you said, I think, recently. And you said, talking is a small but mighty tool. You never know how a conversation might spark some action. So that's the aim for today. We're going to get lots of gems from Ade and also see what action we can get out of it as well. You've had such a broad career, and it's a hard question, but can I have 3 highlights across any bits you choose?
Oh, wow, that is a hard question. You're supposed to start easy, warm me up, you know, just take me straight in there. 3 highlights. Obviously, first one would be making it into the Paralympic squad, going to my first Paralympics, Sydney 2000. A long time ago for a lot of you youngsters who probably weren't born at that time. But yeah, that was incredible. I think it's every athlete's dream to compete for your country and to compete at the biggest event in the world. And I think they're talking about us. I think they're talking about us. Yes. Thank you.
Woo!
We got an official introduction there.
That was better than mine, to be fair.
There we go. That was lovely. Yeah, as I was saying, to compete for your country, to compete amongst the best in the world, was incredible. I remember the pushing out with Team GB at the opening ceremony and looking up and seeing like 110,000 people, I think there were in the stadium. It was just mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing for me. And I never, my parents were against me playing disability sport or any sport because they wanted me to focus on my education and go to university and all of that. And when I told them that I was going to be a Paralympic athlete and I said I was going to be a star, they thought I was bonkers. And I didn't tell them that I was going to the Paralympics. And so the first my mum realised of me that I was at the Paralympics was when I was in the opening ceremony. And she'd given me a phone, and my phone rang when I was going round with Team GB. We'd been announced and entered the stadium. And I looked at it and saw my mum on it, and I was like, oh, should I answer? And I was like, oh, all right, I'll answer. And lucky I did, because she was watching on TV, and she was like, "You're in Australia?" And I was like, yeah. Like, "What are you doing in Australia?" I was like, I'm here for the Paralympics, Mum. And she was like, "Oh my God." And it was like the first time that my parents realized, and the first time that they watched me playing basketball, because it was on the TV. And when I got back to the UK, I went back to see my parents, and my dad came out and he gave me this big massive hug. And I was in the local newspaper, and he told like all our relatives and friends that came around the house, he said, I told you he would do great things. You know, so he was like, they were finally pleased with me. So there was that moment. Then I would say helping the UK win the rights to host the Paralympic Games and the Olympic Games for London 2012. So I was invited by Sebco to be one of the ambassadors and to go out to Singapore. I was in the room when Jack Rogge made that famous announcement. It was just a mind-blowing moment. You know, I went into the room with David Beckham, Daley Thompson, Sir Stephen Redgrave, Kathy Freeman, all these incredible greats, super incredible athletes and ambassadors for British society. And it was us against the French. We were the final 2 that were up to host the games. And I remember David Beckham looking at me and saying, "We haven't won it. The French have done it. The French have won it." And I was like, "How do you know?" And he goes, "All the cameras are pointing at the French. so they must have won it. And then I saw Princess Anne's security guard, and he turned and he looked at me and he went, "We got it in the bag. We got it in the bag." So I was like, how did either of these guys know? And then when Jack Rogg made that announcement and said the games were going to London, it was just like, even now when I think about it, the hairs stand up on the back of my neck, because as an athlete, as a Paralympic athlete, when you go to compete at the games, it's really hard to put into words what it feels like and how important it is, and just what a spectacle it is, and how much it brings the world together, and how special it is for the human race. And when you get an opportunity to bring it to the country, how many people here managed to get a chance to go to London 2012 to watch any of the events and stuff? It was amazing, wasn't it? It was amazing. I think for the whole country, it brought us together, and the atmosphere was just unbelievable. And it was a once in a lifetime thing. And it was also funny to get one up on the French. Well, I can say that now because they've got it next year, so it's all right. It's all right. So there was that moment, and then you want one more.
One more, please.
In my career.
Yes. Or in your life, if you want.
In my life. All right, in my life, I'm going to go to my life then. I'd say, getting married and having a baby. Yeah, it was. It's just super, super special. You know, our wedding was just incredible, bringing all the people that we love in the together. And I said to my wife, she was my fiancée at the time. I said to her, "I've got an MBE, and I think we might be allowed to get married in St. Paul's Cathedral." And I just said it as a joke. And she was like, "Yeah, we're going to do that. Let's do it. Let's get all the paperwork and sort it out." And so she went for it. And there it was, you know, I remember a couple of weeks before we were due to get married thinking, flipping heck, you know, I grew up in Plaistow, East London. I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, and I'm about to get married in St. Paul's Cathedral. This is absolutely nuts. And we get a call actually from the vicar who's going to do the service, and he said it was a week beforehand, and he said, "Bit of a problem. The lift is broken at St. Paul's Cathedral, so like us normal peeps, we get married downstairs in the crypt and in St. Paul's Cathedral, and there's a lift to go down there, and it's nice down there, and but it's a crypt, and there's like a tomb and stuff like that, but it's still pretty grand." And he said, "What we'll do is I'll have some people working on the day, and they'll be watching they'll watch the lift because we'll get it fixed, and if it breaks down, we'll make sure it's fixed and sorted, so you and your friends, because a lot of my friends were in wheelchairs, so you can make it down there." And then we get a call 3 days before the wedding, and he said, "Look, I've just had a thought. There's no way it would just absolutely destroy me if the lift was to break down and you weren't able to get married on the day. So we're going to allow you to get married upstairs." So I think we're one of the first marriages to take place upstairs since Charles and Diana. So we get married upstairs in the big main cathedral. So that was just, and I had all my friends from East London, proper Cockney East Londoners going, "You know, Ade, you've gone up in the world. Look at this place." You know, and so yeah, that was a mind-blowing day.
Wow, I want to see some photos, please.
Online, go on Insta.
I'll Google.
Check it out.
He's such a good storyteller, isn't he? Okay, we're in this beautiful setting, and the theme of this talk is meant to be about community and nature. And you've obviously made a really great series, BBC Two, on the frontline. So I want to know what first sparked your interest in climate change and climate change action.
So I think I've always been passionate about the climate. I've always been passionate about our planet. Ever since I was a young kid, I always wanted to travel the world and see the world. You know, my parents were very strict. I grew up in East London in the 70s and 80s. It was quite difficult because I was one of the few disabled people in my school and in the area. I was one of the few black kids in the area as well at that time. And so my parents didn't really allow me to go out that much. And I just used to watch travel programs on TV. And I would just look at all these travel programs, these safaris. I watch repeats of some of the older people here will remember Wicker's World and Clive James traveling. You won't remember. You're far too young.
I'm
far
sorry.
Too young. But it was this posh English gentleman that would travel around the world, but it'd take you behind the scenes, and you'd go to places like Hong Kong and Australia, which back then seemed super, super far and super exotic. And I was just like, I want to be that guy. I want to be those people. And when planes would fly past our house, I'd look up at the planes out the window and think, where are those people going? I want to be on that plane. I want to be with them. And so I always dreamt, I always had this wanderlust about traveling. And when I did get the opportunity, one with sport and then also with TV, I just realized what an incredible planet we have. You know, the wildlife, the nature, the human beings, the wonders of this world are just breathtaking. And how fortunate we are to be here. We're so fortunate. I always say that this planet is the greatest bit of tech that we've got. We all look at our mobile phones and all these gadgets that we have, but this nature is the most incredible bit of tech. Because what it took for us to be here, for human beings to have evolved to where we are today, and for this planet to be able to sustain life, is a miracle. And there's no technology, no person out there, scientist, who's been able to recreate that. But whilst I was traveling around the world, meeting people, I couldn't help but notice and see that our world was changing. Things were happening. People were struggling. The weather was becoming more unpredictable. People were losing their homes, you know. And then I decided, because I'm a little bit of a nerd. I didn't do that great at school, but you know, I love, you know, knowledge and learning about stuff. So I started reading books, and I read a book by James Lovelock called The Revenge of Gaia. Started reading another book called Mismatch, talking about how we were now becoming mismatched with our planet, and we weren't doing the things that were natural to us. And for me, I thought, this is a subject that nobody's talking about, and nobody's seen as important, and I don't know why. And when you do talk about it, you get labeled as a tree hugger or as some liberal lefty or some other strange term, and it really frustrated me. And I just thought, we have to do something about this. And fortunately for me, I had a platform. I've got profile. I make documentaries. I make films, and I'm in this really privileged position to be able to get the message out there. It took a long time, you know, years and years of, you know, knocking at the door and speaking to the people at the BBC and other channels saying, I want to do something on climate. The first opportunity I had to do something involving people and about our planet was really my Africa series. I did a series called Africa with Ade Adepitan, where I traveled around Africa, and I wanted to tell the story of modern day Africa, not just about the people, but about the continent itself. You know, because I felt that was important, that we understood that. And I think off the back of that, that gave me the opportunity to then go on and do the climate change series. And that series was about telling the story of the people who are living on the front line. I went to the Solomon Islands, and on the Solomon Islands, you know, they produce a tiny, minuscule amount of the greenhouse gases that are being produced by our planet. They are in no way the problem to what's happening on our planet. Yet they're one of the countries that are paying the highest price. You know, I met a young lady who's one of her islands, the islands that her grandparents used to live on, is underwater completely. You know, in the last 10 years, because of sea level rise, it was underwater. I spent time in Australia, saw during forest fire season, devastating. Traveled around Queensland. We drove for hours and saw nothing but burnt rainforest. The smell, the sight of burnt rainforest, it's like a human scar, a scar on our body. When you see it, it has this like proper physical effect on you, seeing all of those dead animals there. And I wanted to tell, there's many other places we went to, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and then we traveled across Scandinavia. And I wanted people in the UK to see these stories, but not only to see what was happening, but to see how it's affecting people. And for those people to tell their stories. Because we're in this fortunate position where we live in this country which is not being directly impacted by climate change, not yet. Not in the way some of these places are on the front line. You know, yes, we had a heat wave and we are having erratic weather, but we're not losing our islands. You know, we're not having our much of our land burnt down and our economic systems collapsing and creating refugees in which climate change is doing in many countries around the world. And I wanted those people to have the opportunity to tell their story on the BBC, which is a massive, massive platform. And I think it was so important that we heard from them. And so, yeah, that was so my long-winded way of telling you how I got into climate and why I was so passionate about it.
By the way, if you haven't watched that series, please do. It's really, really good. There are some seats, by the way, if you want to come forward and sit down.
Yeah, there's some cushions at the front. Get comfy. Come on.
I'd love to know, when making that series, I feel like in this country, we can be a little bit desensitized to bad news because there's a lot of it sometimes. Seeing all of that firsthand, did it leave you more hopeful?
That's a really good question. It is a really good question. So when I meet the people who are living, or when I met the people who are living on the front line, I am hopeful because, you know, the people who I met in Bangladesh, who are dealing with floods, watching their homes being washed away constantly. The people living in the Solomon Islands and also in Bhutan and all over the world on the front line, they are so resilient. And they have the solutions. They know the answers because they've looked after their environments and their habitats. The key, the answers to looking after their habitat and environment have been passed on from their grandparents, their great-grandparents. They do it every day. You know, so in those people, I have hope. Where I am this... where was I? What's the best way of putting it? Where I can feel a little bit, less hopeful, is in Western governments. And I'm going to get a little bit political and technical here, but sometimes, well, no, not sometimes. I feel the current way that government is structured is not fit for purpose for the way our world is set up. Our world is moving fast. Our governments build policies and do things incrementally. And that's not fast enough for what we need, the change that we need. You know, and we have a lot of governments that come in with short-term ideas and short-term, and their own, they feel, right, we might only be in here for 4 years. You know, we've got to give people something that's going to excite them so they can vote for us again. We need to move out of that. We need to see the bigger picture because there isn't much time. Time is running out. Honestly, time is running out. I look at all these young kids here. It's your future. It's their future that we're playing with. You know, we can't mess about. And the things that we can do are so simple, you know, so simple. And it's not down to us as individuals. Yes, we can do little bits and pieces here, you know, cut down on meat and, you know, fly less, get electric cars and stuff. But it's the big corporations. It's the big governments. These are the people who have the power and the mechanisms to make the change so we can live on a planet that's sustainable and that's going to be healthy for this generation.
What a quote. Can we just have a round of applause for that? Also, a little reminder, we're going to have a Q&A soon, so if you've got any questions, get them ready and we'll get a microphone over to you. Another thing we should talk about today is nature and how it makes us feel. There's a lot of research by the Big Lunch, I know you've been working with, about how just being around nature can lift people's mood and improve your response to the world. I just want to know, how do you feel? How does it make you feel?
Oh, I love nature. I love it. You know, I've always been an outdoors person. I remember when I was younger, probably 7 or 8, and all the way till I was about 20, I used to have this reoccurring dream. And it was just of trees, and I would just see trees constantly. And I was like, where is this place? Is this heaven? Is this somewhere that I will go to when we pass away and stuff? And then probably 30 years, yeah, it was 30 years later, when I was in my mid-30s, my father passed away, sadly, and we took him back to Nigeria because he wanted to be buried in his hometown in Ogun State, which is about an hour outside of Nigeria. And we took his body back, and I was in the taxi, and in the taxi on the way to my father's home state, I saw those trees that were in my reoccurring dream. And I think what it was those trees were the last things I saw when I was 3 years old and my parents were bringing me to the UK in the taxi on the way. And those trees always felt like home. And so for me, when I see trees, when I'm around nature, it feels like home. It feels like that natural state. It feels like where it all began for me. So nature just feels, I feel free. It feels like where I should be. It feels like a part of me, and a part of me that is inseparable. I specifically, I still live in London, but we specifically looked for somewhere that was in the greenest part of London. So our house backs onto a park, and the other day I heard this tapping on one of the trees, and I said to my wife, "What's that? What is that?" And she said, "There's a woodpecker." And I remember going out. I pushed out into the park because we can get out to the park for our back gate, and seeing this beautiful woodpecker with a red flash on its back, and just thought, this is just incredible. And I think what nature does is it gives us this sense of wonderment, and what we should never lose is that sense of wonderment, that sense of being wowed and feeling awed. And as we get older and a little bit more jaded and cynical, we can lose that. And I think that's the thing that disconnects us with nature. So nature gives me that sense of wonderment and that sense of awe.
Yeah, sense of wonderment is such a lovely phrase. I do want to poke a little bit into your relationship with nature a little bit, because I think it's fair to say it's not always accessible to all. It could be distance, location, physical accessibility. What has your relationship been like in the different places you've lived, maybe?
Yeah, accessibility is a big thing. There's a term called the social model of disability. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that term. That term says that, for instance, if I use myself as an example, I'm not disabled. I've got polio, and I'm not disabled because of my polio, or the polio that I had when I was a child. My disability comes from the obstacles that society puts in front of me. You take those obstacles away, then I'm no longer disabled. So if you decided to build this stage without that ramp, then I have a disability. But because you've built that ramp, I no longer have a disability. So it's about changing the world and making everywhere accessible to all of us. And you can take that statement and you can take the philosophy, the ethos of that statement and put it in everything. If we don't give kids access to great education, then they are being made disabled by society. So we need to take the barriers out of every section of society. And nature's a great place to start. I'm probably not the best example when it comes to accessibility, because haul myself everywhere. If anyone's watched the My Africa with Ade Adepitan series, and one of the first things I did for the BBC back in 2005 was a series called Beyond Boundaries, where me and 11 other disabled people trekked across Nicaragua in Central America, and we trekked through rainforest. I crawled up a live volcano called Ometepe on my backside for 6 hours, hauled myself up there, got to the top. It was amazing. So I'm kind of the old school sort of side of things of, I just roll my sleeves up and get around. But I'm totally aware that not everyone's like me, and not everyone should be, and there's definitely been lots of places around this country that I've seen that have made nature trails that are that paths that are accessible. And also around the world, in Australia they're doing a decent job, but there is not enough. And the only way we change that is when people who don't have a disability speak out. It's when you are prepared to speak out for something that doesn't affect you directly. That's when we can make change. Because I can talk about it. I can go everywhere and say, flipping hell, this place isn't accessible, the doors aren't wide enough, there's not enough toilets, not enough ramps. But people expect that from me. They expect that from me. But you good old-fashioned two-leggers, as I like to call you, if you go out there and you start thinking, around out of the box and thinking, how would someone with a disability be able to manage this? And you go and speak to the organisers and say, can you do something about that? And often it's just a simple fix. It's just something that's like putting a pathway there. There's loads of ways you can make places accessible. But we need not people like me, but people like you who to speak out in order to make sure that all of us feel included in society.
I love that. We need voices. Actually, on that note, I think I'll open the floor to any questions. If anyone's got any questions at all for Ade, please let us know. Give us a little wave. We're just looking for a microphone.
Stunned everyone into silence.
Everyone's thinking about using their voices, you see. We've got one over here. Sorry, the furthest corner from the mic, just over here.
By the way, isn't it really hot in here? I'm just like, suddenly the sun's beating down. I guess it's the Mediterranean biome, isn't it,
Hello, hi. Sorry, I joined a little bit late, so I missed the beginning. Very nice to speak to you and hear your thoughts. I completely agree about voices and voices for change. It's really, I wouldn't say it's easy, but you've got a voice, and it's much easier for you to sort of speak out with your positions in society, press, etc. How would you advise the youngsters, so the people around us today, to use their voice in a powerful way? Because often we feel ignored. I mean, there's so many vital issues that lots of people feel are relevant.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good question. There are a lot more platforms now than when I was growing up in order to give people a voice. Social media is a good way in terms of like all the Instagram, TikTok and all of that. But I understand it's not for everyone, those platforms. And it's also, they are all very noisy and congested, so often to try and get your message out is difficult. Something we should remember is that, and we all defer to this and we think power starts from the top down. Nah, power starts from the bottom upwards. We are the power. We're the ones whose vote counts, what we buy counts, where we eat counts, where we shop counts. All of those things are ways of getting your message out there. So do your research on what you want to buy, what you want to eat, the clothes you wear, and try and make sure you give yourself the knowledge to understand, so you can, what's right, what works for the planet. And the more of us who start buying those things, shopping in the right places, getting our food from the right places, our clothes from the right places, driving the right vehicles or using public transport, these big companies will follow. they will follow, because we live in a capitalist world, unfortunately, and they go where the money is. And if we're not buying those products that are damaging our planet, then they're not going to sell them anymore. And then we also got to remember there is a wonderful power of community. We all have our own communities, whether it's, I see community as another word for family. It might be our extended family. So it starts off with first your close family. Start speaking to them, start educating them, start getting your message out across to them and getting them to get the message out. And then you've got your outer circles, your friends, your community, the people on your streets. We need to start building communities. We've forgotten about that. We've become quite an individual society. But I love my neighbours, man. I'm so fortunate to live in such an incredible community where we all look out for each other. And we may not all agree on everything, but we have a community. So I think you can use your community as your voice, but also use your spending power as your voice as well.
And thank you. I completely agree with everything that you've just said there. Coming on to the spending power itself, I mean, one of the biggest limitations that we have in society at the moment is that the cost of living, financial situation of most people to some extent. And then actually, yes, it's all good and well speaking out, eating the right foods that are, fair trade or low environmental costs, but that tends to be more at a higher expense. So yes, we're using our financial situation, our sort of livelihood as our voice, at what cost? So how would you recommend that we can make a change, but without then coming at a cost to our own quality of life?
Yeah, go on, finish.
Because I think that's the biggest barrier, because, in an idealist situation, most of us would want to look after the planet for our future generations, but we can't necessarily afford to. And if we are doing it for the future generations, it's coming at a cost of our current generations.
I mean, looking after the planet doesn't have to cost huge amounts. It's kind of like a myth that's being spread out there. One of the biggest things you can do, or the quickest things you can do. And don't get me wrong, I'm not someone who wants to push the pressure of saving the planet on all of us as individuals, because I still think the biggest burden should be taken up by the big corporations. But if you want to feel slightly empowered, what you eat is so important. I've cut down pretty much on all meat, and gone closer to a fully plant-based diet. Beef, unfortunately, is a massive producer of greenhouse gases. So I think if you start eating greener, that makes a difference. But then on a bigger level, bigger scale, political again, vote the right people in power. Do the research and look at who are the people who care about the environment the most, who are the people who are going to do the right thing for your communities. That is one of the biggest tools that we have to make change, is by getting the people who care about our planet and who care about our future. I know we talk a lot. There was a lot of talk about our economy and putting our economy first, but our economy is not going to mean anything if our planet's on fire. If you've got millions of refugees, traveling from across the world trying to get to our Western countries and flooding us, we have to start thinking more, about what we do and using our voting power in that way.
Brilliant, thank you.
Any more questions? Got one over there.
Hi, thank you for the talk. It was really, really inspiring. I'm as a young person kind of in the climate justice activist space, a lot of our time and kind of energy is spent kind of trying to get our message out there and trying to kind of communicate with people in power. and we've kind of seen like the influence that sports people and like especially like people who are amazing and influential in like sports spaces and like celebrities have when they make like political statements. Do you think that there is more potential for like people like you and like celebrities and sports people to kind of work with like climate groups to try and like amplify the messages and put it more on the political agenda?
Yeah, I do. Look, first and foremost, I do find it frustrating that that you have to have celebrities out there to get the message across. You think we're on the verge of this huge potential global catastrophe, and we're saying it's okay. We only really want to hear about it if it's someone that's slightly famous talking about it. That's kind of bizarre. It is bizarre, isn't it? But then being pragmatic on the initial stage, then yes, maybe I'm trying to do that. But I think also you guys as young activists, you should be targeting us. We have a profile, and there's a lot of young people in sport, and we care. We do care. Yes, when you're in the middle of your career, you can feel it is a bit selfish, and you are a little bit self-centered because you're focused on trying to win and be successful. But don't get me wrong, there's a lot of people in the sporting world who are passionate about the environment because we need it. We need it. A lot of our sport takes place in nature, and without it, we wouldn't be able to compete. So yes, target us, come at us. We're there. Please do it.
Any other questions from the room? One over here.
Thank you. I kind of have two questions. The first one is, do you think that the Paralympics of 2012 has a better legacy than the Olympics? And also, do you think that the World Snooker Championships was the best place for Don't Stop Oil to protest?
Do I think that 2012 has a better legacy than
the Olympics of 2012?
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. And then the Just Stop Oil protest. You like to bring
Good
in
question.
some sticky questions here. Well, the first one on the Paralympics, yeah, definitely, because the question was, did the Paralympics have a greater legacy than the Olympics? The Paralympics has had to come from further behind. The knowledge that people have or of someone with a disability was far less than it was for able-bodied people or non-disabled people who competed at the Olympics. So for me, I don't think many people before 2012 could name Paralympic athletes. If I was to ask any of you here back in 2010, 2009 to name 3 Paralympic athletes, you probably couldn't have done that. Maybe you might have said Tanni Gray-Thompson, you might have said mine, but now most people know Ellie Simmons, David Weir, Johnny Peacock, Hannah Cockcroft, and Kadina Cox, and the new generation of Paralympic athletes that are coming out there in the world. And what it has done, in a way, to start off with, is it's made a lot of disabled people feel more included in society. Because we felt on the outskirts, we felt on the outside. Even myself, who played Paralympic sport at a high level, I didn't feel like my sport got the respect that it should have. I felt like a lot of people saw it as just something that you'd done for recreation, and most people, and many people probably thought they could take on a Paralympic athlete. And I'd just say, well, have a look at the times and look at the stats. Are you going to run 100 meters as fast as Johnny Peacock? Are you going to, when I was training, when I was at the height of my career, I was shooting 800 to 1,000 shots a day on the basketball courts, training 6 hours a day. You know, that's not something you do for recreation. So on that level, I felt it was amazing. But what it also did is I think it made every family start to think, you know, whether you have a child with a disability or a child that doesn't, that our child has an opportunity to be anything they want to be. There is a potential for them. They've now got role models. They've now got stars and superheroes that they can look at. And we also redefined what a role model or a hero should look like. What 2012 did is it said, your role model or your hero can have no legs. They can have cerebral palsy. You know, they can be visually impaired. They can be deaf. They can have all these different impairments, but they can still be a hero. They can still be a role model. And I mean, that's an incredible message that you can put out there. In terms of Just Stop Oil, it's controversial, isn't it? With protesters, you know, Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, Insulate Britain. The truth is, people have been talking about climate change and have been talking about cutting down on carbon emissions, moving away from carbon, looking after our planet for decades. Decades. This isn't something that's new, and no one's cared. It's been pushed down in the agenda. You know, no one's really spoken about it in any sort of way. And, you know, governments have continued, you know, renewing their connections with oil companies, and we're not moving away fast enough from fossil fuels. So, yes, it's inconvenient. And yes, in some ways, sometimes it can be dangerous and irresponsible. But I think it's got to that stage of desperation. I don't want to scare you all, but a very good friend of mine, Sir David King, he was the former scientific advisor for Tony Blair and David Cameron. He heads up a panel or a group that I work with called the CCAG group. And I heard him talking about a month ago on climate change. And he says, what we do as a human race in the next 5 years will impact what happens to our planet for the next 2,000 years. This is the first time I feel that we have had a generation that is in charge of what happens for that period of time. But the window that we have of opportunity is getting smaller and smaller. And so I understand, I see the desperation. I've got a 2-year-old son. And some days I'm in tears when I look at him and I think of the world that he potentially is going to inherit. A world of war and famine and resource scarcity. It frightens me. And so I think these people have got to that stage where they have to do it. And I'm sorry it's inconvenient and it's bad, but the only way we can change it is for us to start listening and for us to do things and to start voting in the right way, you know, and putting pressure on our governments and on our leaders to do the right things. 5 years. It's less than that now. 5 years. I can go through a number of things and stats and stuff that's out, indicators that show you how desperate the situation is right now. But I'm not going to do that. I can just tell you, seriously, from the experts that I've spoken to and from the places that I've gone to, we have got such a small amount of time.
Any more questions?
Yeah, thank you again. Great sharing of your thoughts here. I was thinking a little bit about the pandemic time. I feel that it was really an opportunity where we could have changed a lot of things. You know, if you look at, for example, CO2 emissions, energy use, commuting, driving, all these were really down during that period, working from home, etc. And I don't know, my opinion is a bit of
Missed opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. And we've really reverted and maybe spun too much in the other direction now, where everybody is traveling and we're expected to commute again, things like this. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, or maybe things we could take learnings from that and actually make some change?
Yeah, I agree with you. It was a missed opportunity. Uh, you know, I think a lot of you will agree. Yes, I mean, the pandemic was horrendous. You know, what it did to millions of people, especially in lower socio-economic groups, the impact it had on their lives. Also, the impact of the lockdown, which I believe was kind of necessary because we didn't have any other tools at the time. But that also had a massive impact on people's mental health. So those were the negatives. But many of you would have seen what it done to nature, how nature returned back to many places. You know, how the air and the environment felt cleaner because there was less cars, how noise pollution went down. And it was definitely an opportunity for us to look and feel like and see that there is a different way. There is a new way. I don't really know the answer other than I think we all have to become activists in our own way and start championing what we can do to change our society, because we are in this place of consumption. We're in this place where everything in our world is about constantly buying stuff that we don't need, doing stuff that just over egging everything. And not living in tune with our planet. And I think our leaders are not giving that the right messages. We're not being educated in the right way. We're not passing it down to our next generation, how we change things. And I think it's going to have to come from, that part is going to have to come from us individually. You know, we, as many of us, are going to have to try and spread the word and try and change the way we live and say, you know, enough is enough. And I'm afraid we are going to have to protest. You know, we are going to have to protest at some point, you know, because it is getting to that stage. If the pandemic didn't show us that we should change, you know, and all these refugee crises that we're having around the world are not showing us that we should change, you know, it shows that the message isn't getting through. So we have to find other ways. But yeah, I agree. The pandemic was definitely a missed opportunity. The learnings from that, you know, and also there will be future pandemics, you know, because the way the world, the population growth is rising. We are encroaching more and more on animal habitat. And the way viruses travel are from animals to humans. So the more stress we put on animals' habitats, the more likely they are going to be to carry more viruses, and the more we're going to come in contact with them, and the potential for more pandemics. So we have to change the way we're living. We have to, and it's not going to be a backward step. It won't be a backward step. I mean, I keep saying it. I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot, but it's the only way. And I think we have to take this message out there. Take this out to as many people as possible.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I've got a little cheeky one to ask you. Your level of frustration with the political system and the way it's not working, have you ever thought about running as a politician to beat the system from within?
Oh, my days, yeah. People have... I've got friends in politics. I had so many people who have been trying to get me involved in politics. I just find it. I feel it'll be quite frustrating, and I feel like I'd be hampered and restricted in what I can say and what I can do. I'm not sure how long I would last because I'm quite outspoken, and I'd probably say a lot of things that'd get me in trouble from the leaders of the political parties. So yeah, I think I'm going to be on the outskirts for a while until I see a way. There was a moment where I kind of thought, you know what, I need to do something about it. And that was when I was hearing about this new bill that's potentially going to come through about protest and affecting protesters. And I'm just like, come on now. Come on now. This is going too far. I've been to a lot of authoritarian countries and seen how it starts.
Well, there were some laws brought in just before the coronation to stop certain protests happening.
Yeah.
But
well, they're not quite laws yet.
No,
There's still bills and there's amendments,
Yeah.
and it's going through the House of Lords, and it's not quite there yet.
So for somebody who works with disabilities and a lot of unseen disabilities, and we've got a lot of children here who probably find the whole thing that some of the political things we've talked about today a bit beyond them.
Yeah, I'm
how
sorry.
No, it's fine, but I mean, it's how do we make it more accessible? And also the political system, organisations that do exist don't necessarily represent any of our beliefs with regards to climate change, with regards to accessibility, with ethnic minorities. There's loads of, we don't feel represented. So how do we get into understanding who represents us when none of them seem to talk the same language as what we've heard here today?
Wow, there's a number of questions there. The face of our leadership needs to change. It's definitely, when you look at the House of Parliament on all sides, I don't think it represents enough people from different ethnic backgrounds and from socioeconomic groups. I still don't think we hear women's voices enough as well. I think that's a huge problem. And I'm going to sound like a hypocrite here, but you guys need to get into politics. We need to get more people who are not from the usual backgrounds getting into politics and representing your local areas as well. That's important. And I probably will move into that direction at some point, because I realise I feel really hypocritical saying that. But also on your other question about how do we get this younger generation involved, there's just one simple thing. Teach them about our planet. Teach them about our beautiful planet. Tell them the stories of the human race. And it's not about, we can be so quite closed and into this whole thing about nation state, where it's about what happens in the UK or what happens in Cornwall. Let's talk about things globally, and how everything is interconnected. What happens in the South Pole is going to affect what happens everywhere in the world. What happens in Africa is going to happen everywhere in the world. Tell them about the lions, the elephants, the fact that elephants are close to extinction if we don't do something, if we don't change the way we live. The fact that tigers are endangered. There's so many species of animals that are on the verge of extinction. And we can do something to save these things. How awful would it be for us to speak to this generation and for them to talk about the elephant, like we talk about the dodo, or like we talk about dinosaurs. These are wonderful gifts that we have. So every day I talk to my son about wildlife and about animals every day. I take him over the park when he points at insects, at bees. We talk about that. We talk about the soil. Get our next generation to love our planet. Unlike how my generation was. We've taken, my generation, unfortunately, has taken our planet for granted.
Just a little reminder, if you're watching from home online, you can send in your questions as well, and I'll have a little check for that. Anyone else? Oh, someone at the front.
It's gone from no questions to loads.
Hiya. So my son lives in East London, in Stratford. And
that's where I grew up.
Good man. And I go there a lot to see him. And I was just wondering, on your travels, have you seen any amazing examples how you can naturefy urban areas?
Oh, yeah. I think there's so much potential for green spaces, and I know a lot of schools that I've worked with are, building gardens in their schools, and they're getting people to plant more trees as well. So I think it's kind of one of those simple things. We need to plant more trees, and we can get people to plant more trees, and we can also in our local councils petition for more green spaces. Green spaces are so important, but we have to push for that. You have to be involved in that kind of change at that level of structure in towns and cities, and also I think we have to change in what happens in education. Part of our education system should be about including the environment. When we're educating the next architects, the next engineers, the next scientists, all of them should be doing that with the environment in as part of their mindset, as part of the curriculum. It should be, I think I read it in a book, looking after our environment should be a new commandment. It should be one of our new 10 commandments, is thou shalt look after our planet.
That's great. I've seen some examples of bus stops where there's been grass put on there.
Yeah, and you've got these, lots of green walls, vertical gardens, and, there's lots of stuff. Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but there's so many examples of creating green spaces. Yeah.
Well, I love the curriculum one.
Yes.
Great.
Probably time for one more.
Are you going to say you're going to share that cake with me? Because it looks lovely. No!
What was the place that you visited that influenced you the most, and why did it influence you the most?
Oh, good question. In terms of the place that I always find that blows me away the most, that makes me just go, wow, is the continent of Africa. Because it's so diverse, and the people are so diverse in the way they look. You can go from South Africa all the way up to North Africa, and just the way the people look, their skin color, their expressions, their physicality changes completely. The food, the music, the culture, and the language just changes all over Africa. And then the environment, there's parts of Africa where you can go skiing, and then there's parts of Africa with incredible rainforests, their wildlife, the animals. So yeah, Africa, I think, as a continent, really blows me away. But another place that I think is super, super special is Australasia. Going to Australia, the Daintree rainforest, have you ever seen a kangaroo in the wild? It's bonkers. They're bonkers. They stand up on their tails. It's just like nuts. And then when you see something like the duck-billed platypus, with a beak and like sort of wings type stuff, it's just incredible. The wildlife in Australia is absolutely amazing. So yeah, I'd say Australia and Africa, really wonderful, wonderful continents.
Great question. We've had one question come in from online. What have you learned on your travels about how to stay positive in the face of the climate crisis?
It's my faith in people. I think as a species, we, the human race, are amazing. We just have this ingenuity. We have this creativity. I've seen so many powerful, powerful stories of people with nothing creating something, and people who, all these wonderful cultures and stuff like that. So I think it's us. It's us. It's the fact that all of you are here willing to listen to me waffle on about my personal passions, shows that we're willing to be able to change. And the great thing about us as humans is, one, we can adapt, and two, we're prepared to change. And we've come from such incredible beginnings. The way we started off in Africa and spread all over the world and created all of these amazing civilizations. So yes, it's us. We've got to believe in us. Believe in us.
We might have time to squeeze in one final question if anyone's got one. Got one right at the front here.
What inspired you to play basketball?
That's a really cool question. I was initially, like, my big thing was football. So when I went to school, I used to use what's called calipers. So I've got a disability called polio, which affects mainly the left side of my body. It means that I've got severe weakness and paralysis in my left leg. My right leg has got some strength, but not enough for it, not compared to your leg. And so I used to wear what's called calipers, which are these big giant iron rods, which I would wear on a leg brace that would go into some hospital boots. And if any of you have watched Forrest Gump and there's a scene in Forrest Gump where he's running from the bullies and he's got these big leg braces on, I used to wear them. And I walked quite awkwardly, but as I said, I loved sport and I loved football. And at school, I used to go in goal. I played football in goal, and I used to move about because I couldn't run outfield. But in goal, I had great reflexes, and I used to save the ball and leap from right to left. But then, as I got older and I got bigger, and the other kids got bigger, I couldn't keep up with them. You know what I mean? I couldn't move as quickly as they could. I couldn't jump as high as they could. And so I started to get really frustrated. And then one day, my friends were racing me around the streets of East London in a Tesco shopping trolley. And the reason why I was in a Tesco shopping trolley is because I couldn't keep up with all my friends on my calipers. And so we thought the fastest way for me to get around was in this shopping trolley. Whilst I was getting raced around in the shopping trolley, I was spotted by these two physiotherapists who were based in Canning Town, which was also in East London, and they'd set up a junior wheelchair basketball team called the Newham Rollers. And they'd heard about me. They knew I had a disability, and they wanted me to join their team. And they pulled up beside me and they said, "You're Ade, aren't you?" I was a little bit sort of scared and worried about who these like weirdos or strange people just pulling up and how do they know my name and stuff. And they said to me, "How would you like to try out wheelchair basketball?" And at first I looked at them and I was like, there's absolutely no way I'm getting in a wheelchair. And sadly, that was because when I was growing up, there was a lot of negativity around having a disability and being in a wheelchair. So I always tried to hide my disability, and I was in denial that I had a disability, and I was worried that if I sat in a wheelchair, all my friends would start laughing at me and they wouldn't think I was as intelligent as them and all of that stuff, and I wouldn't be able to make any friends. So I was like, there's no way I'm going to play wheelchair basketball. But luckily for me, these physios, they came to my school, they spoke to my parents, and they convinced me to go to a place called Stoke Mandeville where they were hosting the Junior Wheelchair Games. And at Stoke Mandeville, I saw some members of the Great Britain men's wheelchair basketball team playing. And this was the first time that I was surrounded by so many people with different disabilities. So I was blown away by seeing all these different disabilities. But then I saw these guys in wheelchairs playing basketball, and they were the top level. And I was expecting to see them in old rubbish wheelchairs. I thought they were going to be pushed around by other people, but they were in state-of-the-art wheelchairs. Their wheelchairs were funky colors. The wheels were angled like that. They were doing wheelies. They were flying up and down the court at top speed, shooting three-point shots and making like reverse layups. And then I saw this one moment where this guy who was a double amputee, he had no legs, he came flying down the court, and then this other guy came and just took him out of his chair, like hit him. And he flew like about 5 feet out of his chair. So you imagine, I'm like 12 years old and I see this guy with no legs just like fly 5 feet out of his chair and roll down the court. And my eyes are like this. I'm like, oh my days, who are these people? And this guy just got back into his chair, fist bumped the other guy, and they carried on playing. And I was like, these guys are warriors. These are gladiators, man. I said, I want to be like these guys. I want to play basketball like these guys. And they were so cool. Another thing they had was they had the biggest arms in the world. And I was like, I want to have arms like them. And I want to be part of that sport. So that moment inspired me because I was like, this is my tribe. And all of them were talking about being the best in the world. And I'd never been around people like that who were saying, it doesn't matter whether you have a disability, you can be the best in the world. So I was just surrounded by this wall of positivity, and I was like, yeah, this is my sport. And I was hooked ever since.
Thank you.
And on that note, can we have another big round of applause for Ade, please?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I think it's ice cream time.